Thank you, Gwen, and thank you, everybody, for attending to definitely hear something completely different than all of the other wonderful stories at this conference. I will be saying some forward-looking statements today. But on the innovative side, we've been working on this concept for 2.5 years now. And after working with a First Nation from the Pacific Northwest of British Columbia, they are the Nisga'a, introducing the concept of floating their royalties into a public company, brought it to Frank Justra. Frank was one of the founders of Silver Wheaton, later Wheaton Precious, and he said, you know, not only is this the freshest new idea that he's come up with since they came up with the concept of streaming almost 20 years ago, but it is the best new idea that he has heard in the mining space. So he is one of the founding backers of the company. Nisga'a have always been leaders in whether it's Aboriginal rights and title. So many different First Nation-led initiatives have come out of the Nisga'a people. It's only fitting that they are going to break the glass ceiling into capital markets, something that all of us have enjoyed. You see, they have a modern treaty. They'll actually be at the conference tomorrow if you're around. They're up in Ottawa right now handling other different matters for their government. But they want to be a fully self-sustaining nation off of transfer payments from Canada. And the only way to do that is to build big businesses, and that's what we intend with Nations Royalty. So our concept is, starting with Nisga's 5 royalties for advanced projects and operating mines in the Golden Triangle, is where Indigenous people from all across Canada and then ultimately internationally that have modern treaties and have royalties tied to benefit agreements roll those royalties into shares of Nations Royalty. Why would First Nations want to do this? Well, it might not be a good fit for all royalties, to be completely honest. But for many where they're looking for diversification, and that's in the case of Nisga'a. You see, Nisga'a and many other First Nations across Canada have 2 revenue streams from mines. Not only do they have royalties from the mining companies, but they also share taxation revenue with provinces and territories or the federal government. And so it's a way of bringing forward all that value and locking it into shares, and ideally get the multiples to PNAV that royalty companies have enjoyed, you know, with the big 3 or 4 trading at almost 2 times that rate. We are taking a diversified approach, targeting precious and energy metals, but also looking at green energy, looking at uranium, anything where Indigenous people have royalty streams. It goes without saying, it should also appeal to progressive and ESG investors, but basically anybody, any of you that are looking for getting some good returns. And we just announced it this month. We have already started the engagement process with other First Nations. So as mentioned, Nisga'a have always been leaders. They were the first in British Columbia to have a modern treaty, which was signed in 1998 and went into effect in 2000. Out of the 200 First Nations, there's only 3. But even beforehand, they were leaders, particularly some individuals. You see, it was illegal for Indigenous people to be elected or hold public office until after World War II. Just a personal note, I grew up in the mining town of Stewart, BC. My dad was an underground miner and big in the unions, and he helped a guy named Dr. Frank Calder get elected in 1949, the first ever Indigenous person elected to any legislative office in the country, something I'm proud of that he backed, and just points to Nisga's leadership. Since they signed their treaty, they signed 5 different benefit agreements. Now, one question we get asked a lot is, why hasn't anybody done this? Well, you see, most royalties are confidential, including 4 of 5 Nisga's royalties. I had negotiated one on behalf of IBM Mining, my previous company, that was later acquired by Ascot, so I knew how it was structured. It has a unique structure, and within our proprietary database, we have over 120 Indigenous royalties that we are targeting. So there is rapid potential for growth. We have live financing as part of the listing. It is by way of RTO, so subscription receipt financing at 90 cents. We are lead order from Frank and from some other institutions. We are listing at a very good price to get in at a 0.41 PNAV, where our peers are trading at 0.8. I'm obviously a white man standing up here today, but it is hopefully at this time next year there will be an Indigenous leader that will be taking the CEO position. My title is interim. Next week will be announcing Nisga's slate of 3 rookie Indigenous people to be appointed to the board of directors as their representatives. They will own 76% of the shares once we go public. We'll also have 2 very experienced board members. Matthew Kuncum, who many of you might remember from politics. He's James Bay Cree. He's a real hustler as well, too. He's got a bunch of ideas that we're going to target. He just stepped off the Newmont board. Telfer brought him onto the Goldcorp board, and then he's stuck on subsequent to the acquisition by Newmont. Alec Morrison, who he's a fellow Scot. I'm of Scottish origin. Bob Lamont here probably agrees that we're kind of like the First Nations of the UK, conquered by the British and out in the middle of nowhere and repressed. Anyway, so he's a very experienced board member. So he'll act as lead director. I'm also joined by Derek Keevan. He's at the back. Come by our booth to meet him, who is one of the leading consultants and VPs for either mining companies, who's worked for First Nations, has the connections to help grow this company and guide it. And we will be also announcing new Indigenous CFO and corporate secretary next week. So here's the assets. One is cash flowing today, and that's the Bruce Jack mine, owned by Newmont, one of the largest underground mines in the country. The second cash flowing mine will be coming on stream in April. It's the Premier mine owned by Ascot. The bulk of the value is in the giant KSM deposit, which I'll touch on briefly, that is owned by Seabridge. And additionally, another gold deposit, Red Mountain, that I worked on, and the Kitsault brownfield molybdenum site, which is being very actively advanced by New Moly, which is owned by Resource Capital Funds. KSM is the largest fully permitted copper gold deposit in the world. Even just they updated the resource like a couple of weeks ago, added another 6 million ounces. It is truly the tier 1 type of project that you want to have as your cornerstone cash flowing asset. They have spent $400 million US over the past couple of years to start early works construction, and that was financed by Sprott Royalty and Ontario Teachers. So here's our listing price, 0.4 PNAV. But it's interesting, both diversified and precious metals, which usually trade royalty companies, which trade at a premium, are in and around 0.8. Valuation, total valuation of the portfolio is $240 million US dollars. With KSM being the largest, there's 2 phases, because like 50 years from now, they have an underground block cave concept. And you can see Kitsault, Bruce Jack, and Premier. And working back, corporate G&A, 10 years discounted at 5%, is 23 million. So you can see the range in between the two. All these assets will be first quartile, lowest cost producers, and nicely balanced between base and precious metals. So here's the revenue. This year we're expecting we're actually going to we're going to update it because we have new guidance from Bruce Jack. Should be $4 million in revenue. If we can get one more cash flowing in royalty in soon, we'll be in a position to start paying a dividend. You can see KSM's effect as it really starts to ramp up. in 10 years, but has substantial value. So I'm already going a little bit over here, but just want to talk a little bit about growth. We are looking at a balanced approach. We might look at energies like hydroelectric royalties, looking at uranium. Last week we had 2 First Nations reach out. One was a potash, had a royalty on a potash deposit, and another is actually negotiating a benefit agreement right now for a substantial gold deposit in British Columbia and is looking for help. So we think we can be the go-to company to make sure that First Nations people will get the fair share. Size of the prize in an increasing amount in 2022, almost 240 million was paid out in these type of Indigenous royalties, and that's going to substantially grow in the years ahead. So on launch, this will be the largest majority Indigenous-owned public company in Canada. So we're actually, in addition to generating future great returns for investors, we are doing something very good for Canadian business. This is going to change Aboriginal business, where more Indigenous people can meet investors like yourself, access capital markets to finance whatever venture that they would want. And it is something that we are really, really proud of. There needs to be, Indigenous people make up 6% of Canada. And, you know, I know an absolute handful in this business. We need more Indigenous CEOs, bankers, and leaders, and we hope that Nations Royalty will set that as an example. So why should you look at this? First mover advantage. Our connections and the team that we're putting together will have the best relations with Indigenous people throughout the country, and it's those relationships are key to getting them in, First Nations in as shareholders. It should appeal to a whole manner of different investors, including the ESG-focused investors out there. And there is a lot of international potential as well, too. We've met with some Alaska Native corporations. They settled their land claims in 1971. Mexican ejidos have royalty agreements, Australian Aboriginal groups. So we hope with a foundation in Canada that there's a good possibility to go international. So that's end of my presentation today, and come by tomorrow to meet some of the leaders from Nisga'a that will be coming in from Ottawa. Thank you.